My name is Ibrahim Traoré. I am the president of Burkina Faso, a land of dust and courage, of wounds and prayers. I speak not as a conqueror, nor as a preacher, but as a man who carries the weight of a people and the silence of many nights. Africa is a continent where faith still breathes in daily life. Christians kneel beside Muslims. Psalms and prayers rise from the same soil. God is not an idea here, God is survival. I was raised in that reality. Faith was never separate from hunger, from fear, from hope. It was never decoration, it was refuge. And yet, as I rose into leadership, I began to feel a growing fracture between what we proclaim with our mouths and what we permit with our hands. This message did not come to me in a palace nor in applause, it came in weakness. I was seated on an airplane, crossing the Sahel, on my way to a meeting about African unity and shared security. The engines hummed like a distant ocean. Papers rested on my lap, filled with strategies, numbers written in careful ink, promises drafted for tomorrow. I closed my eyes, not to escape responsibility, but because my body surrendered before my mind did. Sleep took me gently. What followed was not a dream of power or victory. It was not a vision of flags or armies. It was a confrontation, a pause, a summons. In that stillness, something spoke, not with thunder, not with fear, but with authority that did not need to shout. It said, "Tell them, time is not generous." When the dream unfolded, I did not see symbols first. I saw Africa as it is often lived, not as it is described in reports. The land appeared vast and exhausted. Cities stood with broken edges. Villages flickered like candles struggling against wind. I saw roads cut by craters, fields turned to dust, schools without voices, hospitals without light. The sound was not explosions alone, but the quieter noise of despair settling in. War was everywhere, even where guns were silent. It lived in hunger, it lived in fear. It lived in the eyes of mothers who no longer promise tomorrow to their children because tomorrow has betrayed them too many times. Then the air changed. Not suddenly, not violently. The darkness did not flee as if chased, it softened, as if forgiven. A presence entered that did not accuse the land, but illuminated it. The light was not blinding, it was steady, it did not crush. It restored proportion. In that light, wounds were still visible, but they were no longer the whole story. He appeared without spectacle, no crown, no fire, no demand, just clarity, just calm that carried weight. I knew who he was before any name was spoken. He did not point a finger at Africa. He opened his hands, and he spoke, not to condemn but to warn. The light did not move closer, yet it felt nearer than breath. I did not feel accused. I felt exposed, as one feels before truth that does not need to argue. Then he spoke again, and this time his words carried a sorrow that weighed more than anger ever could. He spoke of leadership, not of titles or uniforms or speeches, but of the quiet decisions made when no one is watching. He said that Africa does not suffer first from poverty, nor from foreign pressure, nor from history alone. He said it suffers because those entrusted to guard the weak have learned to feed on them instead. I understood immediately what he meant, because I have seen it. I have sat in rooms where men speak of development while calculating what they will take. I have watched aid arrive with cameras and leave without accountability. I have heard prayers spoken loudly while contracts are signed in silence. He said that corruption is not a technical failure. It is a moral wound. It is not merely bad governance. It is violence without noise. He told me that when leaders steal, they do not steal from the state. They steal from the child who will never finish school. They steal from the mother who will bury her son because the clinic had no medicine. They steal time itself, because stolen money becomes stolen futures. Then he spoke words that I cannot forget. He said that many pray with their lips while their hands remove bread from the mouths of the hungry. He said that heaven hears those prayers differently than we imagine. He hears the contradiction. He hears the hypocrisy as clearly as the words. I felt no defense rise in me, only recognition. In Africa, corruption has become sophisticated. It wears suits, it speaks the language of reform, it quotes scripture, it hosts conferences, but beneath the polish, it is the same old theft. It is the same hunger passed down, the same anger fermenting in forgotten neighborhoods, the same despair that eventually erupts into violence. He showed me that rebellion does not begin with ideology. It begins with injustice left unaddressed. When people believe that the system is built to drain them, they stop believing in peace. They stop believing in patience. They stop believing in tomorrow. He said that leaders often fear instability, but they do not fear corruption enough. Yet corruption is the seed from which instability grows. I thought of young men with no work, no trust, no stake in society. I thought of how easily rage finds them. I thought of how many wars we blame on ethnicity or religion when the deeper wound was betrayal by those in power. He told me that the cry of hungry children does not disappear into the air. It accumulates, it waits, it returns. Not as lightning from heaven, but as consequences on earth. He said that if this does not change, poverty will not end, no matter how many programs are launched. Violence will not recede, no matter how many soldiers are deployed, because injustice feeds both hunger and war. In that moment, I did not feel separate from those he was addressing. I am a president, but I am also a man surrounded by temptation, by pressure, by systems that reward compromise and punish integrity. I realized that corruption is not only something we fight in others, it is something we must starve within ourselves. He did not ask for perfection. He asked for repentance expressed in action. He asked for leaders who choose restraint when greed is easy, who choose transparency when secrecy protects them, who choose the poor when power tempts them to forget. He said that Africa does not need more speeches about fighting corruption. It needs fewer corrupt men in positions of trust. When the words ended, the silence that followed was heavy but clean, like air after a storm. The light did not fade when the first warning ended. It remained steady and patient, as if allowing me to breathe before the next truth arrived. Then he spoke again, and this time his voice carried grief that felt ancient, older than borders, older than flags. He spoke of blood that has become familiar. Not the blood of sacrifice, but the blood of brothers spilled by brothers. He showed me faces from across the continent, faces that looked different in color and language, yet carried the same expression of loss. He said that Africa has learned to explain its violence with names that sound reasonable. Tribe, ethnicity, ancestral rivalry, historical grievance. But he said that none of these justify killing. He told me that men have learned to value tribe above humanity, loyalty above truth, power above reconciliation. He said that identity, which should be a gift, has been sharpened into a weapon, and once sharpened it is handed to the next generation as inheritance. I saw how hatred is taught quietly, in jokes, in warnings whispered to children, in stories told only from one side. No one calls it education, but it is. And it works. He said that many leaders benefit from division because a divided people cannot stand together. When fear is directed outward, it does not look inward. When communities are busy blaming each other, they do not examine who profits from their chaos. He said that some speak of peace in public while fueling hatred in private. They fund militias, arm resentment, reward loyalty over competence. They call it strategy. Heaven calls it murder delayed. Then he said words that struck me deeply. He said that men kill each other over skin while forgetting that his blood was poured out for all. No tribe was excluded, no ethnicity favored, no border recognized. He said that every human face carries the same imprint, even when history tries to erase it. I felt shame rise in me, not only for actions taken, but for silences tolerated, for moments when unity was inconvenient, for times when condemning violence might have cost political support. He showed me villages burned not by foreign invaders, but by neighbors. He showed me children who learned fear before language. He showed me how cycles of revenge disguise themselves as justice. He said that if this does not stop, internal wars will never end, no matter how many ceasefires are signed. Because ceasefires without truth are pauses, not peace. They are breaths taken before the next scream. He said that innocent blood does not dry quietly. It stains the future. It hardens hearts. It teaches the next generation that force is the only language that works. I realized then that reconciliation is not weakness. It is courage that refuses to inherit hatred. It is leadership that chooses to lose popularity rather than lose souls. He did not tell me that unity would be easy. He told me it would be costly. But he said the cost of refusing it would be far greater. When he finished speaking, I felt a weight lift, not because the truth was lighter, but because it was clear. After the grief of bloodshed, there was a stillness that felt almost tender. The light did not retreat, it waited. Then he spoke again, and this time his sorrow was quieter, but no less severe. He spoke of faith itself, not of belief, but of what we have done with it. He showed me churches and mosques across Africa, filled to the walls. I saw hands raised, tears flowing, voices lifted. I saw hunger for God that was real, desperate, sincere. And then I saw something else layered over it. I saw microphones turned into weapons of influence. I saw altars turned into stages. I saw fear turned into currency. He said that many houses built for prayer have become marketplaces, not always with money exchanged openly, but with promises sold, blessings priced, miracles scheduled, fear packaged and redistributed. He reminded me of words spoken long ago, that his father's house was meant to be a house of prayer, not a place of transaction. Yet he said that across the continent, faith has been turned into an industry. Pastors and preachers grow rich while their followers grow poorer. Religious authority is used to silence questions, to control behavior, to redirect anger away from injustice and toward superstition. He said that when religion becomes business, truth becomes optional. I felt a tightening in my chest because I knew this was not exaggeration. I have seen leaders hide behind religious endorsement. I have watched crowds manipulated into obedience, not through love of God, but through fear of punishment. I have seen scripture quoted selectively, always in ways that protect power. He said that exploiting faith is worse than stealing money, because money can be recovered. But when faith is corrupted, hope itself is damaged, and people without hope are easy to control. He showed me believers who no longer trust anything sacred, not because God failed them, but because men misrepresented him. He showed me spiritual exhaustion. People praying louder, but believing less. People attending services, but leaving unchanged. People afraid to question because questioning has been labeled rebellion. He said that when religious leaders chase wealth, they trade eternity for applause. And when they manipulate fear, they push souls away from God while claiming to draw them closer. He did not condemn faith, he defended it. He said that true faith produces humility, not domination. It produces compassion, not spectacle. It produces integrity in secret, not performance in public. He said that if this continues, belief will hollow out. People will still use religious language, but it will no longer heal. It will no longer restrain violence. It will no longer inspire justice. It will simply decorate suffering. I realized then how dangerous false religion is. It numbs conscience. It teaches people to accept misery as destiny. It redirects anger away from systems of exploitation and turns it inward into shame. He said that God does not need defenders who profit from lies. He needs witnesses who live truth quietly. When he finished speaking, I felt both relief and responsibility. Relief because faith itself was not condemned. Responsibility because silence in the face of spiritual abuse is complicity. The light remained. The silence that followed was different this time. It was heavier. It pressed inward, not on my thoughts, but on my chest. Then he spoke again. And I understood before the words finished that this would be the hardest truth to carry. He spoke of children, not as symbols of the future, but as lives breathing now, suffering now, unseen now. He showed me faces that should not know fear yet, eyes too alert, bodies too thin, hands that had learned labor before play. He showed me children bent under burdens that were never meant for them. Some carried weapons, some carried trauma, some carried silence so deep it had replaced speech. He said that every society is judged by how it treats those who cannot protect themselves. And by that measure, Africa is bleeding in ways we have learned not to see. He said that children are exploited in shadows that adults pretend not to notice. They are abused in homes that call themselves respectable. They are forced into labor under the excuse of necessity. They are recruited into violence under the excuse of survival. They are starved under the excuse of scarcity. He reminded me that anyone who causes a child to stumble carries a weight that cannot be legislated away. He said that harming a child is not only a crime against the body, it is a crime against the soul of a nation. I felt my throat tighten, because I knew how often children are discussed only in speeches, not in budgets. How easily their suffering is postponed to later reforms. How quickly leaders move on from their pain because it does not vote, does not protest, does not threaten power. He showed me that when children are violated, the future does not forget. Trauma matures, abuse reproduces itself, hunger becomes anger, silence becomes violence. He said that if this continues, Africa will not merely lose a generation, it will inherit one wounded beyond trust. And a wounded generation does not build peace easily. I thought of how many conflicts begin with young men who never learned safety. I thought of how many prisons are filled with those who were once neglected children. I thought of how cheap we make excuses for what is actually moral failure. He said that protecting children is not charity, it is survival. It is the most strategic investment any nation can make, even if it never appears in economic forecasts. He said that when children are protected, healed, educated, and fed, nations heal quietly over time, and when they are ignored, no amount of force can compensate later. He did not accuse only governments. He addressed families, communities, religious institutions, and international partners. He said that complicity wears many faces: silence, indifference, delay. He asked not for outrage but for resolve. not for slogans, but for systems that actually guard the vulnerable. When he finished, the light did not dim, but my heart felt exposed in a new way, as if leadership itself had been redefined. After he spoke of children, there was no transition, no softening. The next truth arrived like ground already soaked, unable to absorb more rain. He spoke of life itself, not in abstraction, not in philosophy, but in weight. He said that Africa has grown accustomed to death, not because Africans value life less, but because death has been made ordinary. He showed me how killing is discussed in numbers, in reports, in strategic language, casualties, collateral damage, acceptable losses, words that make blood easier to step over. He said that every human life carries value before God that no system has the authority to reduce, not for profit, not for power, not for security, not for ideology. He showed me roads where bodies were once left to warn others. He showed me trafficking routes where human beings are sold like objects. He showed me wars waged not for survival, but for advantage. He showed me leaders who speak of peace while financing violence at a distance. He said that life has been cheapened because accountability has been delayed. When killing does not bring consequence, it becomes policy. When blood does not disturb sleep, conscience has already been trained to be silent. He told me that violence does not only kill the one who falls, it reshapes the one who survives. It teaches communities to normalize cruelty. It teaches children that power is taken, not earned. It teaches nations that force is faster than justice. I felt a heaviness in my chest because I knew how often life is traded for stability, how often leaders justify death as necessary, how easily moral lines blur when survival is framed as urgency. He said that Africa's soil has absorbed too much blood, and soil remembers. He said that land cries out not in noise but in consequences, in instability that never fully resolves, in grief that passes from generation to generation, in distrust that poisons even good intentions. He said that killing does not end conflict, it only postpones it while deepening it. I thought of young soldiers trained to obey without understanding. I thought of communities caught between armed groups, forced to choose allegiance to survive. I thought of how quickly humanity disappears when survival becomes the only value. He said that respecting life does not mean refusing to defend oneself. It means refusing to forget the cost of defense. It means refusing to make death routine. It means remembering that every life taken leaves a scar on the one who orders it, whether they acknowledge it or not. He said that when leaders stop grieving death, they have already lost something essential, and when society stop mourning, they begin to rot quietly. He did not promise that choosing life would be easy. He said it would demand courage in negotiations, restraint in retaliation, patience when anger demands speed. But he said that nations that choose life build legitimacy that weapons cannot create. He said that if life continues to be treated as disposable, the earth itself will respond, not with mysticism, but with consequence, with cycles of violence that resist every attempt at control, with instability that no alliance can fully contain. When he finished speaking, I felt the weight of leadership differently, not as authority over others, but as responsibility for life itself. The light did not move, but I sensed a change, as if the focus had narrowed. What came next was not dramatic. It was quiet, almost plain. And yet, it unsettled me more than the images of war. He spoke of knowledge, or rather, of the absence of it. He said that ignorance is not neutral. It is not empty space. It is occupied territory, and whoever fills it first will rule those who live there. He showed me classrooms without teachers, schools without books, children sitting on floors staring at walls where futures should have been written. He showed me young men with strength but no direction, young women with intelligence but no opportunity. He showed me how easily frustration turns into obedience when people are never taught how to question. He said that many leaders fear educated citizens more than they fear foreign enemies. Because education teaches comparison, it teaches memory, it teaches people to ask why some live well while others do not. He said that withholding education is a form of control disguised as poverty. It is cheaper to keep people uneducated than to govern them justly. It is easier to manipulate belief when knowledge is thin. I felt exposed again. Because education is often discussed as a long-term goal, something to be improved slowly when resources allow. He said that this delay is not always accidental. Sometimes it is intentional. He said that when children are denied education, they are denied vocabulary for injustice. They feel pain but cannot name it. They sense exploitation but cannot articulate it. And when people cannot name their suffering, they are easily redirected, often toward violence. He reminded me of ancient words that say, people perish not because of evil alone, but because of lack of knowledge. He said this was not poetry. It was diagnosis. He showed me how truth is buried under rumor, how lies travel faster than facts when people lack tools to evaluate them. He showed me how foreign interests, local elites, and extremist movements all benefit when populations are uninformed. He said that education is not only about employment, it is about dignity. It teaches people that their minds matter, that their questions are legitimate, that they are not born only to endure. I thought of how many times education budgets are the first to be cut, how often military spending is justified as urgent while schools are postponed, how easily ignorance is framed as tradition. He said that tradition should preserve wisdom, not replace learning. He said that faith without understanding becomes superstition, and politics without education becomes manipulation. He said that if Africa does not awaken to the urgency of education, it will remain dependent on external narratives, dependent on borrowed solutions, dependent on those who write history instead of those who live it. He did not call for imitation of other civilizations. He called for ownership of knowledge, for teaching children to read their own reality clearly, for preparing young people not only to work, but to think. He said that ignorance is not destiny. It is a choice repeated until it feels natural. When he finished speaking, I felt a different kind of responsibility settle on me. Not the urgency of crisis, but the patience of construction. The slow, demanding work of building minds instead of managing crowds. The light remained. The final moment did not arrive with urgency. It arrived with clarity. He did not raise his voice. He did not intensify the light. Instead, everything became simple, as if complexity had been a veil, and it was gently removed. He spoke of return, not return to rituals, not return to slogans, not return to appearances, but return to God in a way that could be measured by how people are treated when no one is watching. He said that many speak his name fluently. They sing it, they display it, they defend it loudly, yet their lives contradict it quietly. He said that not everyone who addresses heaven with the correct words is aligned with its will. I felt no accusation in his tone, only disappointment without cruelty. He said that faith divorced from justice becomes noise. Faith divorced from compassion becomes theater. Faith divorced from honesty becomes deception, even when intentions claim purity. He reminded me that true belief does not announce itself first with speech. It reveals itself in restraint, in fairness, in mercy extended when revenge is easier, in truth told when lies protect status. He said that Africa is not lacking religion, it is lacking obedience expressed through action. He said that prayer without repentance becomes habit. Worship without transformation becomes routine, and routine eventually replaces sincerity. I thought of how easily we confuse emotional expression with moral alignment, how quickly we assume that intensity equals truth, how often we excuse injustice because it is wrapped in religious language. He said that God does not need representation through power, he needs reflection through character. He said that returning to God means returning to the poor because he is there. It means returning to honesty because lies fracture societies. It means returning to humility because pride blinds leaders before it destroys nations. He said that when leaders invoke God to protect their position rather than correct their behavior, they misuse his name. And when people applaud that misuse, they participate in it. I felt the weight of personal responsibility settle fully then. Not as president alone, but as a man who must choose daily whether faith will shape his decisions or merely decorate them. He said that hypocrisy does not summon immediate punishment, it summons silence. And silence is more dangerous than judgment, because it leaves people alone with the consequences of their choices. He said that if Africa continues to perform faith instead of live it, God will not argue. He will allow outcomes to teach what words were ignored. But he also said this. He said that healing remains possible. That return is always closer than we think. That repentance is not humiliation but liberation. That justice practiced consistently can rebuild what violence destroyed. He said that God does not seek perfect people, he seeks honest ones. People willing to align belief with behavior, even when it costs them comfort, applause, or power. When he finished speaking, the light did not disappear. It simply withdrew its voice. And I understood that what I had heard was not meant to impress, it was meant to confront. Not others first, but me. When I woke, the airplane was still moving through the sky. The same engines, the same papers on my lap, the same destination ahead of me. Nothing around me had changed, yet everything within me had. I did not receive a strategy, I did not receive a blueprint for power, I received a mirror. What I was shown was not only about Africa, it was about humanity. When it forgets why authority exists, it was about faith when it forgets whom it serves. It was about leadership when it forgets that it will one day answer not to crowds, but to truth. I speak now to Christians, to Muslims, to leaders of the Sahel, and to those watching from distant nations who still care about Jesus and about conscience. I do not ask you to agree with me. I ask you to listen with the seriousness this moment deserves. Africa does not need to be saved by outsiders. It needs to be healed from within. And healing begins where denial ends. It begins when leaders choose restraint over greed, unity over division, protection over neglect, education over control, life over convenience, and faith that acts rather than faith that performs. I do not claim moral superiority. I claim accountability. I wake each day knowing that I too must choose again. The systems we inherit resist change. The temptations of power do not disappear because one has good intentions. That is why vigilance matters more than slogans. To those of faith, I say this gently. God is not impressed by volume. He listens for alignment. He listens for justice practiced quietly. He listens for mercy extended when no one is forced to. He listens for truth spoken when lies would be safer. To leaders, I say this plainly. History does not forgive hypocrisy. It records it. You may delay consequences, but you cannot cancel them. A nation can survive mistakes. It cannot survive contempt for its own people. To elders watching from afar, those who have lived long enough to recognize patterns, I ask you not to retreat into cynicism. Wisdom that stays silent becomes permission for decay. Your voice still matters. Your discernment still steadies younger generations searching for something solid. I do not predict catastrophe. I warn against inevitability. The future is not fixed, but paths have direction, and direction has outcomes. What I was shown was not meant to frighten but to awaken. Not to shame, but to call back what has been misplaced. We are not condemned to repeat what has already broken us, but we are responsible for whether we do. If this message resonates, do not treat it as content. Treat it as invitation. Reflect on it, question it, discuss it with those you trust. Conversations rooted in conscience are how societies recalibrate. And if you wish to continue walking through these reflections together, quietly, without spectacle, you are welcome to stay connected. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys are taken one thoughtful step at a time. I will end where I must begin again tomorrow. Every morning I wake and must choose once more. There is no final victory, only awareness or surrender. If you have listened this far, it is not by accident. Something in you recognized the questions beneath the words. You may agree with me, or you may struggle with what you heard. Both responses are honest. Silence is the only failure. If you wish, leave a thought below. Not an argument, not a slogan, just a sentence about what stayed with you or what troubled you. Others will read it, and they may recognize themselves in it. And if these reflections matter to you, you may choose to remain here, to follow along as this conversation continues in future messages. No pressure, no performance, just continuity. Every day I wake and must choose again. There is no final victory, only awareness or surrender.